Good evening, everyone. My name is Gil Harper. Welcome to our Healthy Conversations webinar. Now, I'm re-recording this introductory session as there was a glitch with the live recorded version, which has just happened at 6 o'clock on 8th of October 2020. So, Healthy Conversations, the webinar, is on a tale of two doctors, Dr. Munshi and Professor Beale, in South Africa in a healthcare system that seems to be under attack. Now, during COVID, we have really witnessed the immense responsibility and sacrifice of our healthcare professionals who've literally been holding our very existence in their hands. And we know that their sacrifice is for our safety, and thus it is for us to keep them safe as citizens of any country. Now, the story of Dr. Munshi and Professor Beale should not be the focus of a webinar, should not be a discussion. We're talking about it because these two doctors were arrested for culpable homicide after a young patient sadly passed away post-op, where the anesthetist was Dr. Munshi and the surgeon, Professor Beale. We are having this conversation, this webinar, because the trial is ongoing. Dr. Munshi has been murdered and Professor Beale is in hiding. Now, in this case, these two doctors were arrested before the statutory body, the Health Professionals Council of South Africa, could conduct and conclude their investigations. And thus, we seem to be at a crossroads in our history, in our health and legal history in South Africa. We should be afraid as healthcare professionals and as citizens. And so we wanted to have a healthy conversation around this. This introduction then led us to introduce our panelists. We have with us Dr. Thandi Mkhize Mabeba and Dr. Kgosi Letlape. Dr. Thandi is a medical doctor with over 20 years of experience. She is a master's in philosophy, medical law, and ethics, and is a current PhD candidate at the University of Pretoria. She's a strong activist for both patient and practitioner rights, and she's a partner in Equity Consulting, which is a niche medical mediation firm. Dr. Kgosi Letlape is currently the chairperson of the Medical and Dental Board and the immediate past president of the Health Professions Council of South Africa, the HPCSA. He is an ophthalmologist by profession and private practice. And Dr. Letlape has served on and currently still serves on many national and international boards. The moderator is Josias Naidoo, who is the founder of Hope4Health. He is an experienced clinician and manager with many years of both health and financial sector experience. An audiologist by profession. He is involved in many community projects and social development, and Josias is an active advocate for equitable healthcare. So we pick up now with Dr. Thandi, who was answering the first question around where we're at in terms of the timeline and the red flags that this case raises for us as citizens of South Africa, and especially for healthcare practitioners.
Has got two common law rules of natural justice, namely the ad alteram pattern, which refers to we need to hear the other side, meaning the other person must be given an opportunity to be heard. And the second rule being nemo judex and sua causa, which means no one should be judged in his own cause, In other ways, the decision maker, in this regard, you'll be looking at the hospital, at what happened at the hospital when the doctors were immediately dismissed. You know, the decision maker must be reasonable, procedural. This rule technically is a rule against bias. We therefore call upon doctors, healthcare professionals to come together and unite against this, as this sets a bad precedent. The matter is not about Dr. Munshi and Prof Beale alone. The matter is about all of us. We need to stand up together and fight this together. Hence, I said, we need to be friends of the court. We need to make our own submissions to change the cause of this case. We cannot allow this to proceed, because if it proceeds, tomorrow it's another doctor, and they'll be using the very same case as a case law to nail the next doctor. So we cannot allow this to proceed. We need to be amicus curiae of the court in respect of this matter. We need to have lobby groups that will look into the legislation and see how we can influence the legislation in respect of this issue.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Thandi. I think Dr. Letlape is still having issues logging on. Are we able to assist him?
Thanks, Dr. Thandi. I think Joe and Dr. Letlape might be having their little side meeting. Technology. It just seems to be you and I at the moment. And you know what you've laid out is incredibly scary for us in terms of precedent. I think that's where you ended off. We don't want this case to be the first case in terms of our case law setting a precedent which will have huge and lasting impact. Now, perhaps break it down for us a little bit. There's a huge gap between the medical profession and how the healthcare professionals are discussing this case and the general public from what I've seen. The case sort of has bounced in and out of headlines with the same sort of quotes being used by specific experts. But what are the public doing? How are we engaging? People like myself who does not have a long history in the healthcare profession. I am a scared South African citizen looking at this case now. So some of the points that I have jotted down is there are so many questions. What is the impact of this going to be for healthcare professionals? So are we going to have a situation where a crisis calls for decisive action and doctors, surgeons may now say, if I take this action, do I run the risk of being arrested and jailed? So how then does that affect people's ability to make decisions quickly? What does this do for mental health, for teamwork, for, it's all those sort of things that I am sitting here wondering about. How is this going to affect health professionals working on a daily basis, making decisions, split decisions that need to save lives? Now, what does a split decision need? What needs to happen? Now we have to step back and think, will I be arrested for making this decision?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Jill. Hence, if you look at what is happening, health professionals may not understand the implications of this case. So if Dr. Munshi and Prof Beale lose the case, as the profession, we have lost. It's not about them, it's about all of us. Because in law, it will set a precedent. And what is currently happening is where a complainant decides not to follow any procedure and jumps and approaches law enforcement agents. By law, law enforcement agents are not supposed to refuse any citizen or any person for that matter who present himself or herself with a criminal case. They are duty bound to investigate that criminal case. But our argument is that a complainant leaves other avenues, leaves any other internal process of reporting the incident and goes straight to the law enforcement agents. And when it gets there, the law enforcement agents take it up and run with it. So this is a serious problem because what it means is that any mistake, you must remember a common law crime will include not only culpable homicide, it also includes assault. So in our profession, assault will be categorized where you intervene, for example, any intervention without consent. It's called assault. If I draw blood from a patient without consent, it's assault. And assault is a common law crime. So if we do not act now, it's going to come from culpable homicide to assault, to a patient claiming, I was consulting Dr. X, and Dr. X drew blood from me without my consent. Hence, I'm saying we need to have galvanized lobby groups that will influence the legislation and also even the NPA guidelines in terms of how to handle these cases. This is not about an individual. It's about all of us. This is not about Dr. Munshi and Prof Beale. It's about the profession itself. We have to stand up together and fight this together.
Thank you, Dr. Thandi. I think both Dr. Letlape and I seem to have resolved our technical difficulties. So, can everyone hear us? Are we okay?
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, Dr. Letlape.
Welcome, Dr. Letlape. It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you for the invite.
So we've touched on the issues that the NPA has brought forward in terms of this particular case. And Dr. Letlape, in terms of the HPCSA, we know that you guys are the first and foremost the protector of the public. So in terms of the rights of patients, that falls under the ambit of the Health Professions Act and the regulations that the HPCSA provides in terms of guiding professionals. Where in that system have we lost track of that ability so that the NPA can cut the HPCSA out, prevent you guys from administering what you should be doing in terms of protecting the patients and run completely independently in terms of a criminal case?
In our history, this has not happened before. This is the first time that we have an incident like this. And we're just as perplexed as all of you are. And contrary to what has been stated, we are fully cognizant of the implications of the actions that have been taken against Prof Beale and Dr. Munshi. It is not correct to say that the HPCSA might not be fully aware of the implications. Just for the record, I am an ophthalmologist in private practice, and I'm just as impacted and as concerned as what has happened to Dr. Munshi and Prof Beale can happen to me and my anesthetist as we go about doing our work every day. So for people to think that we do not understand the gravity of the situation, nothing could be further from the truth. I have a colleague for the last 43 years. We were registered as practitioners, as second-year medical students in 1977. For the last 25 years, Dr. Munshi has been his anesthetic. So these are people that we know, and these are human beings. He's not just a statistic. So it is about his legacy, and it is about what is being done to both professionals. And we're mindful of the fact that if this is not dealt with, it can happen to any of us, and it will happen to all of us. We're concerned about criminalization because in this country, in the continent, and in other parts of the world, when an act becomes criminalized, society seems to have a license against those that are being criminalized. We've seen what happens in countries where same-sex relationships are considered criminal, and what happens to those people. Vigilantism from society against those people. So we're extremely concerned, and we were so concerned as the HPCSA that immediately after the arrest of the two colleagues and them being paraded like criminals, we wrote not only to the NPA, we also wrote to the police commissioner. We copied the Minister of Health and the Minister of Justice and the Minister of Police to say, this is untenable. There are prescripts and there are processes that need to be followed. There's an Inquest Act that should be followed. There's also the parallel process of a complaint that can be lodged with us, and that we will follow up in accordance with the prescripts of the law. So that letter went out in December, post the arrest. But prior to that, once the matter hit the press, we were engaged. And we said, in terms of our processes, no complaint has been laid. Subsequent to that, the family, through their lawyers, lodged the complaint. And our processes kicked in, and the matter was investigated. So it is not true that nothing has been done from the HPCSA side. We've had, as our processes defined, the complaint was lodged with the registrar, the matter was investigated, and the pro forma complainant felt that in terms of our processes, in terms of the allegations and what was being put forward, a suspension hearing should be held to consider whether the practitioners should not be suspended pending the full hearing and the outcome of the full hearing. Those suspension hearings occurred for both Professor Beale and Dr. Munshi. The suspension hearing of Prof Beale was concluded in December, and Prof Beale was suspended from practicing while the matter was being prepared for conduct inquiry, for full inquiry. The matter of Dr. Munshi was considered, and I will not go into the technical details. Suffice it to say that the family wanted to prosecute the matter themselves, say, you cannot replace us as a regulator. We have a statutory duty to do as the law prescribes that we do. To that extent, from the expert opinion that was presented for Dr. Munshi's hearing, a suspension was deemed not appropriate, and the matter was processed in accordance with our procedures of the matter being referred to preliminary inquiry, and the matter will then be prepared for conduct inquiry if it is so deemed by the preliminary committee. So the matters were both being processed in terms of our processes. Unfortunately, COVID came in, which delays our processes. Our prescripts say this matter should be a conduct inquiry, has to be a sitting. We've been trying to amend to be able to have virtual sittings so that we can proceed with hearing the matters so that answers can be given to complainants and practitioners can also be relieved of the stress and burden of having a complaint hanging over your head. We never got a response from the police. We got acknowledgement from the NPA in February. There was an appearance in court again because we asked that the matter should be taken out of the courts and the normal inquest process should be followed, or we be provided with reasons as to why this case is being treated in this manner. Nothing from the police, but with acknowledgement from the NPA. Subsequently, they appeared again, I guess in September sometime, in court. And Prof Beale called us to say, I'm being asked to take a deal and I just acted professionally. I find that unacceptable. So we were in the process of going back to both the police and the NPA on the matter. And we kept informing the Minister of Health on this issue as our principal. Unfortunately, what happened to Dr. Munshi happened in September, post another court appearance that, as I've explained, we were handling because Prof Beale appealed to us. Sadly, Dr. Munshi was gunned down, as all of us know. What we also find disturbing is that post the gunning down of Dr. Munshi, there's been almost like silence. There's never been outrage from the communities. There's never been any issues of, the police coming, investigating this gruesome killing of a colleague, of a fellow citizen and a fellow human being. And we find that sad, that it looks like the forces out there welcome what happened to Dr. Munshi. And that is frightening, and that is sad, because what happened to him can happen to any one of us, given the circumstances. And I've said many times, this matter of Prof Beale and Dr. Munshi was crying inquest, inquest. We see absolutely no reason why the matter was criminalized. And we wait to hear from the NPA what transpired. It then transpired that when they send us an acknowledgement of receipt in February, there was also a cover letter explaining themselves. But that cover letter never came through. So that only came through to us late in September as we are engaging with them. We've had, and subsequent to the gunning down of Dr. Munshi, we went back to the minister saying, these are high stakes for the medical profession. We are seeking an intervention. And at that time, we hadn't heard from them until when we had just had an acknowledgement. The minister has intervened, arranged a meeting with the Minister of Justice, the NPA, and ourselves as the HPCSA and senior officials in the Department of Health. And by agreement between the Minister of Justice and the Minister of Health, we as officers were tasked to go and meet and look into the matter and report back to the ministers. We've had a subsequent meeting with the NPA. We are now arranging a further meeting where the NPA will bring the police with them, and we will have officials from the Department of Health in attendance. We need answers. If practicing medicine is now criminalized in South Africa, we need to know. If we as doctors are now practicing at our own risk, we need to know. Because as Dr. Mkhize has said, it has major implications for us as individuals and for how we're going to practice medicine and for access to care for the people of South Africa. We don't want to cherry pick our patients. We don't want to be scared that once we interact with the patient and there's an unfavorable outcome or there's something that they're unhappy with, whether it's, I'm not getting better on your treatment, or whatever the case might be. Then they take the law into their own hands, and we become victims of serious crimes and to be even murdered. It would be a sad day for the practice of medicine in this country. And it would be a dereliction of duty from us as the HPCSA, as the regulator, who's being undermined, where legal processes of the Inquest Act, which are in the hands of the police and the judiciary, are not being utilized. We cannot stay silent on this matter. Our lives depend on resolution of this matter. Our ability to practice without fear depends on the resolution of this matter.
Yes, absolutely.
We take it extremely seriously. I'm at the end of my term. The lives of the boards have been extended. So I'm still the chair of the board till the end of October. But this is personal. I'm a practitioner. And even when I'm out of office, I will ensure that practitioners rise if we're going to survive. Medical doctors have been undermined in this country by society, by state, by the government for far too long. The working conditions of medical practitioners in this country have worsened. I've been on the register of the HPCSA for 43 years, since I was 18 years old. And every year, things have not been getting better. From the mid-80s, we've seen things slide. In all sectors, both public and private, we face serious challenges. Now, here's something that everybody forgets. One of the questions that we ask is that when a patient gets into the private system, you will be a patient to a doctor. The doctor you may need an intervention that requires hospitalization. You may need an intervention that requires you to go to theater, as was the case with the child. It means then your surgeon will bring in an anesthetist and will bring in the hospital. There'll be 3 parties that are taking part in the care of the patient. If something goes wrong, all 3 parties need to give account as to what went wrong. You can't have one of the 3 parties playing holier than thou. So we also feel aggrieved by the actions of the hospitals, suspending practitioners without reporting them to the regulator. Since the hospital was a participant in the treatment of the child, why do they become player and referee? So there are many issues that we have to take up as a medical profession. So it's not just about the NPA. The behavior of the hospital is unacceptable, because they are just as responsible for treatment of the child as the doctors were. We don't know what went wrong. We don't know if anybody can be held to be responsible for this. That's why you have an inquest. That's why we have our processes in the Medical and Dental Board. And those processes need to be followed. But here's a big problem. The hospitals account to no one. They are a law unto themselves. And here, I don't know what role they were playing. I'm a surgeon. If we have a problem with a resuscitation, there could be a few things that went wrong. Something that we've missed with the patient, something that might go wrong that we could fix. But for us to be able to fix that, you need an enabling environment to do your job properly. So what I'm just saying is that all 3 parties that are part of the treatment of a patient have to account for their actions, have the account for their part, so that it can be adjudicated as to whether everything was done professionally, everything was done in accordance with standards, and it was just an unfortunate outcome, or whether there was any negligence anywhere. The purpose of an inquest would be to look into those matters. And it's only after the inquest has been held. The inquest can recommend that those that were participating in the treatment or any of the parties, it could exonerate everyone, or it could ask that criminal prosecutions be preferred against any of the three parties or all the three parties. But let due process be followed. We are mindful that we need to be accountable as a profession. And these processes hold us accountable. I'm mindful that the most painful thing that can happen to a parent is to bury their own child. We are not indifferent to the grief of the family, and they have a right to get answers to what happened. But there are defined processes that will provide those answers. They might not work at the speed of light because due diligence needs to be followed. But they've worked so far. And if this atrocious act is reversed and people take account, it'll continue to work going forward. There's a lot that needs to be improved. We need to expedite our processes in the Health Professions Council. We need to ensure that matters are concluded timelessly and that people are provided with the answers that they seek. The process has become too legalistic and it takes too long. We need to take it back to it being a professional conduct process, whether it is at prelim or at conduct inquiry process. We've written to have the regulations revamped to ensure that it becomes professional, it becomes speedy, and that there's accountability, and that we account to our patients and to the complainants. We also have a duty to ensure that practitioners are treated fairly. They have rights, they have responsibilities. They are not involved in criminal acts. They are professionals, registered and entitled and credentialed by the registering authority for those professional acts. And all these due processes need to be followed. Otherwise, South Africa becomes a jungle, and the practicing of medicine becomes like parking a car at your own risk as a practitioner. Thank you for allowing me to speak on this matter.
Thank you, Dr. Letlape. We understand that this issue is not entirely new. It may have been more dramatic than some of the other issues, but there are numerous cases where practitioners have been assaulted or attacked by aggrieved family members. I think there was a case recently in KZN where a doctor was attacked, a female doctor was attacked by male relatives of the family that somebody was injured or passed away. Are we starting to see reports of this happening? Is this becoming more prevalent? Is this current case, the Munshi Beale matter, only the tip of the iceberg?
I don't know, but I think the Munshi matter becomes the tipping point. It's the point at which we need to stand up and act. You see, part of the problem is that when a doctor gets attacked, that's a criminal act, and that's a matter for the police. It's a matter we have no jurisdiction over, so it will not get reported to us. I've been on the other side of being a chair of the Medical Association in this country for 9 years. I've moved on the regulatory side. We've moved for advocacy for safe working environments for healthcare professionals. We've seen emergency workers being attacked, being raped as they go out on calls to go and help society. So there's an element of a society that has lost its ethical values. And as healthcare practitioners, we are not insulated from that loss of values in the profession. We've also seen cruel acts from professionals that we've had to adjudicate upon. So we have a problem as a society in terms of our ethical values. And that we need to face up to as South Africans. So it's more than just a question of people that are grieving for a family. It is a society that we have become. So it's a much, much bigger problem where the current value system in South Africa is MMI, me, myself, and I. The Ubuntu that Archbishop Desmond Tutu has promoted is disappearing from us as a people. And that's part of the fundamental problems that we face.
And as this case progresses, and the HPCSA has now taken a stronger stand in terms of dealing with the NPA, and you've highlighted a few of the issues and a few of the processes that the HPCSA is going to amend and change so that this type of issues are not seen very often in the future. What are the other types of reforms as a whole, not necessarily just HPCSA, but some of the society, some of the associations, and health professionals as a whole, we can start to implement to prevent these type of issues from happening in the future?
I think one of the issues is the loss of humanity. There are other factors that we hope we will hear that will come out of the investigation. But there's been reports of political interference in this matter. There's been reports of, possibly a family that is affluent, that is connected, and those aspects muddying the waters in terms of how this is going to be taken forward. If there's a mishap of this nature, getting answers should not be dependent on your position in society, your wealth, or your political connectivity. Every family, no matter how poor, needs to be provided with answers when we have mishaps of this nature. It is this uneven society where there is no common humanity that creates the problems that we have, where there's exceptionalization, where there's no honor in being ordinary, humble, and just being a good citizen. And those are the issues that we will have to deal with without preempting this issue, because those are issues outside our domain. We await the report from the provincial commissioner as to what drove them to deal with this matter in this manner. And I would be cautious not to generalize until we know what happened here. But it would be remiss of me not to accept that the working conditions for healthcare professionals in general in this country are less than ideal. The working environment is increasingly not becoming conducive for ethical behavior, and it's now becoming dangerous for the personal safety of the healthcare professionals.
When we say that the working environment is not conducive to a proper functioning of the health professional, in the private sector, do you feel that perhaps the corporatization of healthcare is largely to blame for some of the issues that we're facing?
I think it's a part of it. But the main issue is the deprofessionalization of the profession by itself. So we shouldn't make corporates the problem. We are the problem. We are selling our souls to the corporate world. Those that are leaders in the profession, we have failed to create an enabling environment for ethical practice. And we've allowed people outside to dictate. Here's what is worrying. In terms of the laws of this country, the practice of medicine is a privilege for registered healthcare professionals, whether it's nurses, optometrists, doctors, dentists, dietitians, etc. And if you practice without being registered with the relevant authority, it's a criminal act. But increasingly, you have funders dictating clinical protocols. People that were never seen in any health school. By definition, once they do that, they are basically engaging in criminal activity. And we've allowed it to happen as healthcare professionals. So you're correct about corporatization, but we should not act like victims. We've allowed it to enter our profession. And it is becoming extreme, and it is increasing because of our indifference. I mean, a few years ago, not so long ago, we had to deal with a phenomenon called global fees, where the funders now take it to the next level, where they will pay a global fee to an entity that is not registered to practice medicine, like a hospital. And from that global fee, the professionals will scramble and decide who gets what, who gets how much. So it becomes survival of the fittest. The ethical principles fly out. There'll be sharing of professional fees with people that are not registered as professionals, that have not participated in any commensurate manner on the care of the patient. That's the corporate sector taking over. Now, not only have they taken over, we've allowed them to even dictate who gets paid, who works, who doesn't work, who's a preferred provider. I mean, it's a mess. But that's a mess that has happened on our watch as healthcare professionals. We don't understand the implications of a third-party payer that then dictates how the game should be played. And it goes to your question about corporatization. It is a major, major problem, but there's also an underlying problem of deprofessionalization. And for that, the healthcare practitioners, we must take full responsibility for deprofessionalization of our professions.
Yeah, but just bringing it back to this specific case, in terms of how the media has responded, we're seeing that pretty much people out there, the layman has already made a decision based on the case because of the way the media has played this out. How would you recommend practitioners as a whole first, and then liaising with the media in terms of managing the situation or managing an issue where the practitioner may have been involved in a similar situation, to minimize the risk and to minimize the trial by media that this type of hype can create?
I think for me, the starting point is there are defined processes that need to be followed. And that's my greatest gripe. If those processes are not followed, the media will follow anything, anywhere. So we can't then turn them into victims. If they become lazy and they do not do the investigative work, and they do not know whether this was done properly, was not done properly, it's not our duty to educate them. But it's also not our duty to censor the media, because the public has a right to know, and the media has an important role to play. I cannot talk about issues of sensationalism. There are areas of concern in terms of how the media behaved in this manner. But let me put it this way. If there's a mishap, it's reported to us. The media would have the right to report on the matter if it comes to their attention. So the key issue for me is due process being followed. And I can't say to the media, they need to know what that process is, because it is not their field of expertise. But I hope they would have high journalistic standards where they would understand that this is a professional act and they need to deal with it with caution. But once you are criminalized, as happens anywhere, the media will come to you and say, what's your comment? You've been arrested. We can't stop those type of activities. So we need to go to the root cause of the problem. And we need to humbly appeal for reporting that will not be sensationalizing the matter, that will not be aggravating our predicament as healthcare professionals, that might promote vigilantism. So we'd advocate for the media to do their job responsibly. It's not for us to tell them how to do their job, but we would plead with them not to endanger our lives through their reporting.
Thanks, Dr. Dr. Thandi, just quickly, if we can touch on some of the issues that this case has brought. Everything seems to center around perhaps an error in judgment, or perhaps just a technical error, or procedural error, or sometimes just a complication of surgery. In situations like this, how can surgeons, practitioners, and anyone that's actually involved in this type of procedures protect themselves a little bit better than this case? Or are we all just in a position right now where any small error, any small injury can see us all being dragged to court?
Thank you, Joe. I think it's just a general principle when you look at medical law and ethics. In terms of medical law, your ground of defense, or your number one ground of defense, will be consent. It is very important for healthcare professionals to ensure that they solicit consent for any medical intervention. Because lack of consent will put that healthcare professional in a big mess. So in an event like you've mentioned, a mishap, an error of judgment, that will obviously come when the professional is in court and perhaps facing charges of medical negligence, and in a case of delete, and the presiding officer will be the one who will conclude that there was an error of judgment. But in terms of ethics, we as professionals are duty bound to, at all times, do good to patient, do no harm to patients, make sure you obtain consent. It's beneficence, non-maleficence. Obtain consent from patients prior to any medical intervention. I just explained that not only culpable homicide is an issue here, it will move from culpable homicide, which seems to be a big issue in terms of criminalizing professionals. It will also go to assault, which is part of common law. And as professionals, how can we avoid being charged for assault, for assaulting patients? And assault in this regard will be, any, intervention on the body of the patient in terms of the Constitution. I mean, the patient has got the right to bodily integrity. So any intervention without consent will amount to assault. So consent is the key thing in our profession.
And in terms of, Dr. Letlape alluded to this earlier, when you go into surgery, your consent and your liability and all the documentation that you sign are pretty similar in terms of content to cover both the practitioner and to cover the hospital. How is it in cases such as this that the hospitals are able to remove themselves from liability and place complete and total liability onto the practitioner, and that very same document is unable to protect the practitioner?
Is that to me?
It was to Dr. Thandi, but you can take it, Dr. Letlape.
You said Dr. Letlape. You said Dr. Letlape. I can still answer that one if you want me.
Okay.
The question related to, you said something about the consent being similar to the one that is used by professionals and the one that is used by hospital. Is that what you said, Josias?
Yeah. So
And
prior to any,
yes,
prior to any intervention, any consultation, any procedure, all practitioners generally get a consent declaration signed, and the declaration usually identifies potential risks and indemnifies the practitioner to some degree against some of the risks that the procedure may entail. Similarly, the hospital does the same thing. In situations like this, how is it that the one party is able to absolve themselves from liability, whereas the other, in this case, the practitioner, is unable to do so?
I think what Dr. Letlape mentioned in terms of, the hospital is in this situation, a person clothed with authority, and the doctor in this situation is a subservient, obviously because the hospital has got financial muscles. But in terms of the law, these issues should be addressed equally. The doctors and the hospital should be liable, should account for what transpired in the case of Dr. Munshi and Prof Beale.
Can I just add something?
It's for the court to decide whether the consent signed by the patient in respect of the hospital protects the hospital, and the consent that was signed under the doctor is different. But in this regard, it is because the hospital has more authority over the doctor. Hence, the hospital was able to dismiss or suspend the doctors without following due processes that we have mentioned in terms of PAJA, the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act. That did not happen.
Dr. Letlape, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think there are certain fundamental foundational rules of the profession that people need to be aware of. Consent is critical, as you've said, because if you don't have consent, any procedures you'd be assaulting the patient. But we should also understand that having consent does not indemnify you. Having consent just cements the fact that this is a professional relationship. And you are not indemnified because you've given consent. It just cements the fact that this happens in a professional relationship. And if you act professionally and you uphold your ethics, there's nothing to be scared of. And that's all you need to do. Uphold your ethics. Don't do things you have no skills for. Don't do things that were not agreed up front. Unless if there's an emergency and you got to do something to deviate, to save a life, etc., etc. But if you have consent and you're acting within your training and you're doing things that you are capable of and you're not experimenting on a patient, you don't need indemnification. Because to try to indemnify you is counterintuitive to saying you are a professional, because you want to not account for your actions. You can't indemnify yourself. It's your professionalism that will indemnify you. That's why we don't talk about guaranteeing results. And I always tell doctors, if you act professionally, you act within your area of competence, you are trained, and the ethics tell you, don't do things you don't know how to do, because then you're experimenting. And there are different processes to be followed on experimentations and trials, etc., etc. And this is what I want people to realize. I mean, I've been in private practice for more than 30 years. And I had to decide when I was being sold malpractice insurance. And I said, I do not intend to malpractice. I intend to practice professionally. It does not mean I might not make errors. I will always have favorable outcomes. No, but I will always act professionally. And it is that professionalism that will come to my defense. So I don't need to pay anybody any money to fund prospective malpractice, because I have no intention of malpracticing. So consequently, my career is at a crossroads, because I don't have malpractice insurance, and because of what is happening in the environment, I've now been told by a clinic that I've worked in for the last 30 years that if I can't produce a malpractice insurance certificate, I can't operate. I've operated relying on my ethics, relying on my professionalism, getting consent from patients. And I guess now I've reached the end of the road, because I have no intention to malpractice, and I have no intention to feed an industry that should not exist. So understand that consent does not indemnify you. Act professionally, uphold your oath. Don't do things you're not trained to do. Because the courts will always ask, what would a reasonable doctor have done?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's the standard. So if I'm an ophthalmologist and I don't know how to do macular holes, I shouldn't do macular holes. I should be able to diagnose them, refer them to the right person, and stay in areas where I have acquired the skills and the competencies to be of value to patients. And that's where part of deprofessionalization and being scared and industry driving our behaviors come in. And we'll need to have a discussion about what does it mean to be professional. And the nightmare that we've created about indemnity and malpractice insurance is now a higher cost than the care of patients.
Okay. I think we're very quickly running out of time, so if we could get any last comments from our two speakers before we field a few questions and start tying up.
Well, there was a question from the panel about the wheels of the police process can be very slow, if possibly influenced. Should we as a profession set up and sponsor a private investigation into the death, assassination of Dr. Munshi? In the spirit of professionalism, that's the police's work. And our duty, if they are not doing their job, is to bring it to the attention of the president of the country so that they can do their job. And we've got to fight vigilantism. But I would rather stay in my lane of being a doctor, assisting with regulation as an elected person, and being a practicing doctor every day. And I would rather get answers from them as to why that matter is not being investigated. And I'd rather agitate that people do their job than try and do their job for them. I wouldn't want to become an AfriForum of sorts.
Thandi, any last minute comments, closing remarks?
For me, it goes exactly to what I said previously, that as healthcare professionals, we need to galvanize lobby groups, and that will influence the legislation, in particular in respect to these issues. And also to say that we have to be amicus curiae to the court, and actually as healthcare professionals submit our own amicus brief. We need to speak from one voice, and we cannot fold hands, because it's not about them, it's about us. We need to hold hands together. It is in our hand to change the course of what is happening in our country.
Well, for me, it's just to say that what happened to Dr. Munshi should not have happened. And the humiliation of Prof Beale and Dr. Munshi as professionals is regrettable. But we've got to stand up and ensure it doesn't happen ever again. That's what we need to commit to. It does not mean that we commit to closing ranks. No, we'll always be accountable, we'll always be transparent, but there are sufficient processes that need to be followed. And we should use Dr. Munshi's death as a call to action. In his memory, we should ensure that it doesn't happen to anyone else. A gentleman and a consummate professional was killed in the most cruel manner. And what you can do as colleagues is to ensure that his death is not in vain.
Thank you to the speakers and everyone that has attended. Dr. Letlape, before we hand over to Joe, there is a question in our Q&A section. With regard to Dr. Munshi's HPCSA investigation, now that he has passed on, does that investigation come to an end, or would the investigation continue and you guys would then still release a finding?
Well, as Dr. Mkhize would say, that in the judicial process, once this happens, it's the end of the process. Because the person has to be able to defend themselves. They have to be able to account, because this is a professional conduct inquiry. And the key issue is that when a matter goes to that, you got to come and defend your professional actions and account for your professional actions. Sadly, he was denied that opportunity.
Okay. Hand over to Jill just to do some thanks and start tying up this show.
Wow. Dr. Letlape, Dr. Thandi, sure, some key takeaway points that I think would be worth highlighting as a thank you and appreciation. Joe sparked something when there was a moment we spoke about, are we at the tipping point? Are we at the tipping point? Is this case our tipping point? And I think let us not tip over. Let us not be at that point of no return. Dr. Letlape, you said, if practicing medicine is going to be criminalized in South Africa, we need to know. Such a profound statement. We need to know. Healthcare professionals need to know. South African citizens need to know. And then, Dr. Thandi, you picked it up where you're saying it's in our hands. It is in our hands, the hands of South African citizens and healthcare professionals, to change the course of this case still, and to change the course of history, because it seems like we really are now at a crossroads. Dr. Letlape, this is our call to action at this crossroads. So with that, I want to say thank you very much on behalf of Hope for Health for being with us, for participating, for the incredible insight, clarity, the courage, and as well, you gave us a lot of strength and hope for this moment in history. And we will see where this takes us on the crossroads. So because we are in a virtual meeting and in the midst of COVID, we would like to thank you by giving you a digital gift. If we can just bring it up on screen. So we present you with a digital illustration of each of you by a young upcoming designer, Megan Kelly. And now you can put it on as your profile picture, screensaver, wallpaper, or if you want, you can even go old school and print it out and hang it on the wall. But thank you very much. I will email it to you in high res. Thank you to all the participants. We actually reached maximum capacity, and we will ensure that this is on YouTube and that we engage further. These are difficult conversations. This is a very difficult conversation, but these are necessary conversations. These are healthy conversations, and we look forward to hosting you for more healthy conversations. Thank you very much, everyone, and good night.
Thank you for having us, Jill.
Thank you.
And thanks and good night.
Thank you.